Hello! So today I'm going to teach you guys how to feed your starter. And before we feed our starter, we're going to discard. I do get asked what's the difference between discard and starter, and really the only difference is your starter is what you're actively feeding. And your discard, you're basically just hibernating your starter. So I have a lot of discard in my refrigerator, and all of that could be starter if I took it out of hibernation and started feeding it and leaving it on my counter on a daily basis. So they're the same thing. I'm just not feeding my discard every day. Um, well, actually, I don't feed my starter every day. I feed it every 2 to 3 days. It keeps it active and happy and fed. It's pretty low maintenance. So if you plan on baking at least a loaf of bread every 2 to 3 days, just leave it on your counter. Then you don't have to worry about putting it in hibernation and taking it out. It's just a lot less calculating that you have to do. So what I'm going to do before I feed my starter is I'm going to discard. So I've got just an empty jar here to put my discard into. But before we discard, I want to know exactly how much starter I have in my jar. So I'm going to take a plastic container. Plastic is so much easier to deal with than metal or glass. The starter, it is like cement on metal or glass, and for some reason with plastic, it flakes right off after it's dried. So I'm going to use my nice little plastic measuring cup here. I'm setting it on my scale. I have my scale set to grams. I'm going to zero this out because I don't care how much it weighs. I want to know how much this weighs. So we're going to start by emptying this into here. It's a nice goopy mess. And you don't have to do this every single time you feed your starter. I'm just showing you guys right from the beginning. I already know how much my glass jar weighs. My glass jar weighs 400 grams, so it's really easy for me to know how much is in my jar. It looks like I have 65 grams here. And just for the fun of it, we're going to discard just so I can show you guys how easy it is. You can discard as much as you want. The more you discard, the more flour and water you're going to save, because the more discard you have the more starter you have in your jar, the more you have to feed it. So that's why we discard. I have 64 grams in this. I actually want to get it down to 50. So I'm going to get rid of 14 grams. So now I'm going to actually put my glass jar on here. I'm going to zero that out, and I'm going to put exactly 14 grams into this glass jar. And there we go, 14, 15. Oops, 16 actually. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit back in here. Let's see. Perfect, 14. Okay, so now that I have discarded, I'm going to put a lid on this, and I'm going to put it in my refrigerator to hibernate. Now I'm going to put my glass jar back on my scale, put my scale back to 0, put my starter back in here. Actually, you know what? It's actually going to be easier for me to feed my starter while it's in a container with a larger opening. So you know what? I'm actually going to show you how to feed it in this container. All right. So we know that we have 50 grams exactly in this plastic container. When we feed it equal to the amount of starter that we have. So if we have 50 grams of starter, we're going to feed it 50 grams of spring water. If you use tap water, the chemicals, the bleach in it will actually kill your starter, and then you are not going to get a good bread. It won't rise, it won't ferment well. So just use some cheap spring water. I actually got mine at the dollar store, so very easy to access, very cheap. Anyway, so we're going to feed it 50 grams of spring water and 50 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour. So we're going to put this right back on our little scale here and zero it out. Just a second. Okay. I use paper plates because this stuff is such a pain in the butt to clean off anything. So I avoid putting it on other dishes if I can. Alright, so 50 grams of starter, and water is pretty heavy, so it's not going to take a whole lot of water to get us to 50 grams here. There we go. And you know what? If you go over by a few grams or under by a couple, it's not a big deal. Sourdough is very forgiving, so no biggie. So I'm at 50 grams with my water. I'm going to zero out my scale one more time. Now I'm going to use my unbleached all-purpose flour. I'm going to put 50 grams in this. And there we go, 50 grams. Now that we have this all in our container here, we're just gonna mix it up and try to get the lumps out of it. And if there's some lumps, it's not a big deal. But I just kind of like smush the lumps into the sides of my container. Okay, so that's what it looks like. So as you can see, it's a little bit lumpy, it's not perfectly smooth, and that's totally fine. I'm just gonna put it right back into my jar here. Now, since I have 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of water, and 50 grams of flour, that makes a volume of 150 grams. Maybe I should say weight. I don't know. Anyway, 150 grams is what it will be at. You'll know that your starter is ready to use to make bread when it has approximately doubled in size. And anything that gets stuck on the side, I just kind of smush it down there. Also, the jars that I put on the Amazon list should be exactly the same as this. There are numbers here. Like this is 100. It says milliliters, but it matches up pretty well with the grams. So we know that there's 150 grams in here, and look at that. It's right at the 150 line. I still like to weigh things. That's how my friend taught me how to do it, and that's how I've been doing it, and it works really well. I'm going to put my little bonnet on the top of this jar. You just want it to breathe well, but you also don't want bad bacteria or bugs getting into it, obviously. I have this handy dandy little band that shows the day of the week and also the approximate time that I last fed it. And you want the top of the band to rest right where your sourdough is at, your sourdough starter is at currently. And then, let's see, today is Friday. I like to use this little line with a leaf. That's what I'm gonna put everything on. So let's see. Let's switch it to Friday. It is 6 p.m. right now. So there we go. I've got my nice little leaf line here right at Friday at 6 p.m. And it's lined up right where my sourdough starter is starting at. So when it's ready to use, it should double in size and come right up to this 300 mark. To avoid overflow, I would recommend that, let's see, you don't want to, you really, if you're going to use a jar this size, you probably don't want to start out with any more than like 100 to maybe 120 grams or so, because it's always going to double in size. So if you have 100 grams of starter and then you feed it 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour, you'll be at 300 grams. And then by the time it's ready to use, it's going to be way up here to 600. And sometimes it will overflow if it's a really warm day. I've had that happen. It makes a really nasty mess that's very difficult to clean up. So if you want to make a lot of sourdough bread all the time, I would recommend getting a bigger jar. So there you have it. So our sourdough starter is ready. It's ready to go. So usually it will double in size within 4 to 8 hours. And then after those 48 hours, I'm going to mix up my dough, and then I let it rest for 8 to 10 hours. And I actually will put mine in the fridge. I do what is called a long ferment. It just, the longer your bread dough ferments, the more that fermentation process is eating up the carbs and the sugars that are in the flour. And so then the more gentle it is on your blood sugar. For me, I need it to be as gentle as possible. So that's why I do a long ferment. So I put it in my fridge at night. And then the next morning, let's say it's Friday morning, whatever. I'll get up in the morning. I will pull that out of the refrigerator and I'll set it on the counter. By the time I get home from work, it is ready to be baked. And then I will put it in the oven at 375 for 48 minutes, and that makes a perfect loaf of bread for me. You can do more complicated steps to make it more pretty or to make it a fluffier loaf of bread. I prefer mine to actually be a bit more dense, and I actually like that a little bit more sour taste. So that process works for me. I'll send you guys more information on how to make a fluffier loaf of bread if you want it to be a bit more like a classic loaf. So you kind of, if you know when you want to bake your bread and you want to have that fresh loaf, you kind of have to do the math backwards a little bit. So let's say Saturday morning is when I want to bake my bread, and I want it to sit in the refrigerator for at least 24 hours. So then Friday morning, I want to mix up my dough and pop it in the fridge that morning. So if I want to mix my dough Friday morning, then Thursday night is when I'm going to feed my starter, because then it will be ready to mix dough by Friday morning. So that's how I figure it out. I feed my starter at least every 2 to 3 days. I haven't gone past those 3 days because I just want to make sure it stays really nice and healthy and fed. So yeah, I would at least plan on baking every 2 to 3 days. You can discard down as much as you want to. You can feed a starter that only has 25 grams, and you're only putting in 25 grams of flour. So hopefully that all makes sense. You'll always go by the amount of starter that you have in your jar. Trying to think if there are some other important things to point out, but I think that's pretty much it. There are a lot of recipes that you can use your discard for. I actually just made a really delicious and super easy flatbread yesterday. It called for 2 cups of discard, 4 cups of all-purpose flour, and a little bit of salt, and like a cup of milk. And you just mix up this really dense dough. I set it on the counter. Actually, this morning I mixed it up. Set it on the counter. Right now, it is actually ready for me to bake. So actually, why don't I just show you this process? Okay, just a second here. So my dough got nice and puffy, which is great. I'm gonna put a little bit of all-purpose flour down on my board. That just helps your dough not to stick too much. I actually cut the recipe in half, so it ended up being 1 cup of starter, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and don't worry, I can send you the link for this recipe. A half a cup of milk and 1 teaspoon of salt. And it makes 8 really nice flatbreads, about that size, like a great size for a personal pan pizza. They're great for sandwiches. So delicious. I made them yesterday for the first time. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit of flour on my hands. Sometimes it helps to put some oil on your hands. I'm just gonna, this comes out actually like so nice and easy out of the plastic bowls. Okay. Oh yes, very sticky. So I'm actually gonna put a little bit of oil on my hands. One moment. Also, forgive me if this tutorial is super annoying. I've never made a tutorial in my whole life, so this is probably super awful, but here we are. Okay, so just to make sure that my little 8 pieces of dough are even, I'm just rolling it into a ball. That way it should be just perfect. Okay, I guess I'm out of my clean dough scrapers. Those are great to just cut through. I'll just use a knife, no biggie. I'm gonna cut it in half. Okay. And then my half I'm cutting in half. I mean, hopefully y'all know how fractions work. No, I'm just kidding, of course you do. Then cut my quarters in half. Makes these nice little dough triangles. Okay. Do it to my other half here. Again, nothing has to be perfect. Like, there's a bit of a science to making sourdough stuff, but overall it's really forgiving, so it's no big deal. Okay, so now I'm gonna actually turn these into nice little balls. It just makes it easier when you're stretching them into those nice little personal pan, flatbread, whatevers. It'll make it easier to turn them into nice round ones instead of them being very oblong shaped. You see what I mean? That's gonna make a really weird flatbread, so I'm just gonna go with that. So far I haven't had to use like any KitchenAid mixer. Even when I mix my bread dough, it would probably make it a lot easier for me, but I just usually use my hands, or I'll put on some gloves to mix my dough. Really don't need much special equipment for doing this stuff, which is nice. Maybe there's a better way of doing this. I have no clue. I'm kind of like just flying by the seat of my pants here. I'm sure you can tell. Okay. So yeah, probably in like 20-ish minutes, they'll just be nice and rested. Maybe I didn't even have to let them rest for 20 minutes. We'll just see. I put the pan yesterday on medium. It seemed to work out much better in my stainless steel pan, although I did cook half of them in my Teflon. Yes, I know it's not the greatest for your health, but nonstick is handy. But anyway, I spritzed some avocado or olive oil in the pan, had it on medium or high. They just needed to cook on each side for 2 to 4 minutes. And actually, it's kind of like pancakes. When they start bubbling up and getting a little bit stiffer on the edges, then you know it's ready to flip. I'm going to be making a bunch of these up, and I'm just going to freeze them. Which will be so handy for a quick dinner. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so actually, this first one, I think is ready to go. I just kind of start in the center, and I just kind of squeeze outward as I'm just turning it around and around in my hands. It's a bit tedious. I'm trying to make it somewhat even. I think the recipe said that if you flatten them into about 1/4 of an inch, that's a good size. Just kind of starting to stretch a little bit more aggressively. And as it is stretching out a little more, you can actually just start using gravity. And I'm just kind of pinching the chunkier edges now and letting gravity pull it down. Yeah, there you go. I could stretch it a little bit more if I wanted to. But yeah, that's about it. And then you just chuck it in your pan. Yay. So yeah, that's it. This is such a great recipe to use up the discard. You could, so you don't have to discard. You could actually just keep getting more and more jars and keep feeding your starter and feeding it, but you will end up with 10 billion jars of starter that you're constantly feeding, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to keep feeding. That's why we discard. So anyway, hopefully I answered most of your questions about sourdough. I hope I didn't overcomplicate things for you guys. Let me know if you need a simpler video. I will do my best. I'm sure that there are simpler videos on YouTube, but I thought I'd give it a try. Yeah, holler if you have any questions. Peace.